The war between Earth and the Calirian Empire had gone on for years. It was a brutal conflict, with neither side willing to back down. Earth's military forces were stretched thin, and the Calirians, a powerful and technologically advanced species, showed no signs of stopping their attack. But then, everything changed in an unexpected way. The Earth government, desperate to end the bloodshed, proposed a bold and risky solution: a marriage between one of their top military officers, Captain Ethan Ford, and Princess Zoera, the heir to the Calirian throne. This marriage would be a diplomatic arrangement, a peace treaty sealed through an ancient practice of political unions. It was the last option on the table, and everyone knew that if it failed, the war would continue. Ethan was sitting in a dark, quiet room when the message came through. He had just finished his shift, feeling the weight of the war on his shoulders. The voice from his commander was firm, but not without hesitation. "Captain Ford, you've been chosen for a special mission," the commander said. "It's not a simple peace negotiation. It's more than that. You'll be marrying Princess Zoera to stop this war." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had heard of the princess, a fierce and proud ruler, known for her intelligence and her skill in battle. She was a symbol of strength for her people, but she was also cold and distant. The idea of marrying her didn't seem real. It felt like some twisted dream. But the mission was clear, and there was no turning back. Ethan wasn't sure how he felt about it. He was a soldier, not a diplomat. The thought of marrying someone he didn't even know made him uneasy. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized this was the only way to bring peace. His duty was to Earth and to the people who depended on him. If this marriage could end the war and save lives, then he had no choice but to do it. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. The Earth government sent a team of advisors to help him understand the Calirian customs and traditions. They told him everything from the right way to address royalty to the proper ceremonial robes he would have to wear. None of it felt real. How could something as simple as a wedding be the key to ending a war? But in this situation it was. He tried to focus on the bigger picture, but his mind kept drifting back to the idea of marrying a stranger. Princess Zoera, on the other hand, was not thrilled about the arrangement. She had always been taught to put her people first, but this was different. The Calirians were a proud species, and they would never accept a marriage to a human unless it was something more than just a political tool. Zoera had grown up in the palace, groomed for leadership, and had never thought that one day she would be forced into a union with an outsider. But the war was destroying her people, and the Calirians could not afford to lose any more lives. Her advisors had made it clear that this marriage was her duty. She was the future of the Calirian Empire, and her actions would shape the future of her people. Despite her reluctance, she knew what had to be done. The thought of marrying the human officer was unsettling, but if it would bring peace, she would do it. The day of the wedding arrived faster than either of them had expected. The ceremony was to take place on Calirian soil, in a grand palace that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers and the hum of unfamiliar technology. Ethan was dressed in elaborate robes, feeling like an outsider in a world that was not his own. The Calirians had a way of making everything seem grand, almost too grand for comfort. As he stood in the grand hall, waiting for the princess, Ethan's mind raced. What was this going to be like? Was this really happening? How was he supposed to go through with it? His thoughts were interrupted when the doors to the hall opened, and the princess entered. Zoera was unlike anything he had imagined. She was tall and regal, her sharp features framed by long silver hair that shimmered in the soft light. Her eyes, bright and intense, scanned the room as she walked towards him. There was no warmth in her gaze, just a cold, calculating look that reminded him of the power she wielded. But despite the distance in her expression, there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. Ethan had expected her to be distant, and she was. There was no smile, no welcoming gesture. She simply stood before him, waiting for the ceremony to begin. He tried to meet her gaze, but the weight of the moment made it difficult. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a political statement. Their union would be the symbol of peace for both their worlds. The ceremony itself was long and formal, with many rituals that Ethan didn't fully understand. He stood beside Zyra, barely able to focus on the words being spoken. The alien language and customs were foreign to him, and he had no idea how he was supposed to react. But he followed along, doing his best to appear confident and respectful. The moment the ceremony ended, and they were declared husband and wife, a strange feeling washed over him. This wasn't what he had expected, and yet it was all real. As the crowd cheered, Ethan couldn't help but glance at Sarah. She didn't look happy, but she didn't look angry either. Her expression was unreadable, as if she had already accepted her fate. He wondered if she felt the same unease he did, but there was no time to ask. They were now bound together, not just by the marriage, but by the hope of a peaceful future. But little did Ethan know, the real challenges were only just beginning. This marriage was just the first step. What came next would test both of them in ways they could never have imagined. The days following the wedding were strange for Ethan. He had always been a man of action, someone who thrived on solving problems and moving forward. But now it felt like his life had come to a standstill. The Calirian palace, with its towering walls and lavish decorations, felt both foreign and suffocating. Despite the opulence, Ethan couldn't escape the nagging sense that he was trapped in a world he didn't understand. Zara remained as distant as ever, though she did not treat him with the coldness he had initially feared. She spoke to him with polite courtesy, as if they were two colleagues working together on a shared mission. But there was no warmth in her voice, no hint of friendship or even respect. It was as if they were strangers who happened to be bound by circumstance. He saw her every day during diplomatic meetings, at dinner, or in the gardens, but they never spoke much beyond the necessary pleasantries. The tension between them was palpable, and it was starting to wear on Ethan. He couldn't help but feel that there was something more beneath the surface, something Zyra was holding back from him. One evening, as the two of them sat in the grand hall, the silence between them became unbearable. The guests had long since left, and the palace seemed quiet, as though it was holding its breath. "You're not like the other Calirians," Zyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, her eyes locking with his for the first time in days. "The others, my people, they are all focused on duty, on their honor, on what is best for the Empire. But you don't seem to care about any of that. You're here because you had no choice." Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering her words. It was true that he hadn't chosen this path, but he had accepted it. He had married her to stop a war, to bring peace to Earth and to Calirians. But it was becoming clear that peace wasn't as simple as signing a treaty and exchanging vows. It was more complicated than that. "I didn't choose this," Ethan admitted, "but that doesn't mean I don't care. I didn't come here to be part of a political game. I came here to help end the war." Zura's expression softened for the first time. For a moment, she almost looked vulnerable. "And what if the war isn't over?" she asked quietly. "What if this peace is just an illusion?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Zura stood and walked to the large window overlooking the city. The lights of Calirian cities twinkled in the distance, casting long shadows on the floor. This marriage was supposed to end the conflict, but there are still factions within the Calirian Empire that do not believe in peace. The war might be over for now, but I can't promise that it will last. There are forces that will always seek to undermine it. Ethan stood up and moved toward her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "So, what do we do?" Zara turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We have to protect the peace we've made. We have to convince the people that this union, our union, is real. That it's not just a political move. And we have to prove it, even if it costs us." Her words hung in the air, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. He had come to Calirians to stop the war, but now it seemed like the battle was far from over. If anything, the stakes were higher than ever. The next few days were filled with more meetings, more speeches, and more appearances in front of the Calirian leaders. But through it all, the tension between Ethan and Zira remained. They were partners now, but not in the way he had imagined. There was no understanding between them, no common ground. Every conversation felt like a challenge, a test of their ability to work together despite the growing divide between their worlds. One afternoon, as they sat in a conference room with Calirian officials, a proposal was brought to the table that made Ethan's blood run cold. A faction within the Calirian military had suggested that the alliance between Earth and Calirians should be solidified by military force, by combining their armies for mutual protection. Zira's face remained neutral as the proposal was discussed, but Ethan could see the slight tension in her jaw. She didn't seem surprised by the suggestion, but it worried him. Was this what the Calirians really wanted? To control Earth? To make them a military ally rather than a peaceful partner? He leaned in toward her. "What's going on?" he whispered. "Is this really what your people want?" Zira glanced at him, her eyes betraying a brief flicker of doubt. "This proposal is just one of many," she said quietly. "But there are others who will use this as an excuse to start another war. And if I don't agree to it, I risk losing their support. I'll lose the peace I've worked so hard to build." Ethan's mind raced. He had known that the peace was fragile, but this was more dangerous than he had imagined. A decision like this could destroy everything they had worked for. If the Calirians tried to force Earth into a military alliance, it would be an act of aggression that could easily turn into war. "This is why I married you," Zira said, breaking his thoughts. "I need you to help me hold this peace together. We cannot let the war come back." Ethan nodded, but in his heart, he knew this wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. This was about survival. Survival of the fragile peace between their worlds. As the days passed, the weight of their marriage grew heavier, and the lines between duty and desire blurred. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if Zira's fear of war was just the beginning of something even more complicated. Would he be able to help her protect the peace, or would he find himself caught in a conflict he never intended to join? The days in the Calirian palace grew more tense as each hour passed. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting on Zira, and with it, the distance between them grew. She was always busy with her duties, attending meetings with the council, and speaking with military leaders. The once distant walls between them had become a fortress of silence. But despite the coldness, Ethan couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. It wasn't love, not yet, but there was something about her that intrigued him. She was strong, fierce, and determined to protect her people, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. He saw the burden in her eyes, the weight of the throne pressing down on her, and he couldn't help but want to help her carry it. Zira, on the other hand, seemed more withdrawn than ever. She had always kept a distance, but now it was as if she was hiding behind her responsibilities. The marriage that had begun as a strategic alliance had turned into something more complicated. She had agreed to this union for peace, but the cost was becoming clear. The emotional walls she had built between them were becoming harder to break down. It was a quiet evening when Ethan noticed something strange. He was walking through the palace gardens, trying to clear his head after another exhausting day of diplomatic meetings, when he saw Zira standing alone by the reflecting pool. Her back was to him, and she was staring at her own reflection in the water, lost in thought. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he should approach. But something about the way she stood, so still and yet so filled with emotion, urged him forward. "Zira," he called gently. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," she said softly, almost surprised to see him. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, offering a small smile. "I thought you'd be at another meeting by now." "I needed a moment to think," Zira said, her voice tight. She looked back at the water for a moment, as if searching for answers in its depths. I feel like I'm losing control. Ethan took a few steps closer, his heart aching for her. You're not losing control. You're just carrying a heavy burden. We both are. She looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. This marriage, this alliance, is not just about us, Ethan. It's about the future of two worlds. If I fail, if I make the wrong move, everything could fall apart. The peace we've worked so hard to build could be shattered in an instant. Ethan nodded. He understood the stakes, but what he didn't understand was how she could carry so much weight on her own. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here to help you, Zaira. I may not be from your world, but I know how to fight for what's right. Zaira looked at him in silence for a long moment before finally speaking. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've been trained my whole life to lead, to rule, but I never asked for this. I never asked for the throne, for the responsibility. And I never asked for this marriage. But now I'm bound by it, bound by duty. And the more I try to break free, the more I realize there's no way out. Ethan's heart went out to her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the fear of being trapped in a life she didn't want. He had his own reasons for being here, but they were starting to feel insignificant compared to the weight Zaira was carrying. I can't promise I'll make everything easier, he said quietly, but I can promise that you don't have to go through this alone. For the first time, Zaira's face softened, and she stepped closer to him. Thank you, Ethan, she whispered. I don't know what I would do without you, but I fear that our path is already set. There's no turning back now. As they stood there in the quiet of the gardens, the world outside felt distant. For a moment, it was just the two of them, two people caught in a storm they had no control over. Yet, despite everything, there was a connection between them, a bond that had started to form even in the chaos. They were different worlds, different lives, but they were in this together. The silence between them grew, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding. The weight of their situation hung in the air, but there was a sense of solidarity now. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it didn't seem as terrifying. Together, they might just stand a chance. The next few days saw more political meetings, but Ethan and Zaira began to find their rhythm. They still didn't speak much, but there was a quiet respect between them that hadn't been there before. As they navigated through the delicate balance of diplomacy, Ethan felt the growing pressure of the situation. He was not just a pawn in a game anymore. He was an active participant in shaping the future of two worlds. But as the tension continued to rise, so did the danger. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing behind the scenes, something bigger than the political maneuvering they had been dealing with. Zaira was right to be worried. There were forces at play that neither of them fully understood. And soon, the calm that had settled over the palace would be shattered, revealing the true depth of the challenges they faced. But for now, Ethan held on to the hope that together they could face whatever came next. The grand hall had filled with the sounds of celebration, but for Ethan Ford, the moment felt anything but joyful. As the cheers of the Calirian guests echoed around him, he stood next to Princess Zaira, his new wife. It was strange. This marriage was meant to stop a war, but the weight of it felt more like a chain than a bond. Ethan looked at Zaira from the corner of his eye. She stood tall and dignified, her face as composed as ever. There was no hint of warmth in her expression, no smile or glance of reassurance. She was a princess, and she had been raised to carry the weight of her people's expectations on her shoulders. But to Ethan, she seemed distant, almost cold. After the ceremony, they were escorted to a grand banquet hall, where the Calirians celebrated their new union. It was a massive affair, filled with high-ranking officials, dignitaries, and military leaders from across the Calirian Empire. The food was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Strange, colorful dishes that glowed faintly and smelled both unfamiliar and exotic. Despite the extravagant feast laid out before them, Ethan had no appetite. He couldn't stop thinking about the journey that lay ahead. He had married Princess Zyra for peace, but there was no telling what his life would be like from now on. His mission had been clear: marry the princess, stop the war, and return to Earth. But now, as he sat at a grand table surrounded by unfamiliar faces, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he had anticipated. Princess Zyra barely touched her food, instead focusing on the Calirian leaders and military officers who crowded around her, speaking in rapid foreign language. She answered their questions with practiced politeness, her voice calm and controlled, but Ethan noticed the way her eyes flicked over the room, never staying too long on any one person, always scanning. She seemed to be watching for something, or maybe someone. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when the Calirian Chancellor, a tall figure with broad shoulders and piercing eyes, approached them. He gave a deep bow, his voice low and respectful. "Princess Zyra, Captain Ford, allow me to offer my congratulations on this monumental union. This marriage will bring about a new era of peace between our peoples," the Chancellor said. Zyra inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the compliment. Ethan did the same, though he couldn't help but feel that the Chancellor's words, though kind, were more about political posturing than anything personal. "Thank you, Chancellor," Zyra said. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of something beneath the surface, an undercurrent of something unspoken. She quickly turned the conversation to matters of diplomacy, talking about trade agreements and military cooperation. Ethan found himself lost in the details, unable to keep up with the intricate politics of the Calirian Empire. He had never been one for diplomacy, and now, as he listened to Zyra speak with such authority, he realized just how out of his depth he truly was. Later, as the evening wore on, the crowd began to thin. The lights of the hall dimmed, and the once lively conversation slowed to a murmur. People drifted off to their private chambers, leaving Ethan and Zyra alone at the grand table. Ethan finally spoke, his voice quiet but sincere. "I didn't expect this." Zyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What is it that you didn't expect, Captain Ford?" "This marriage," he said. "I didn't expect it to feel so distant. I thought I'd be helping to bring peace, but now that it's over, it feels like there's more to it than just the ceremony." Zyra's eyes flickered for a moment, almost as if she were considering his words. She leaned back in her chair, her posture still regal, but there was a subtle shift in her demeanor. For the first time since they had met, she seemed a little less guarded. "You are not the only one who feels that way," she said, her voice softer than before. "This marriage was not something I chose. It was something I was told to do, for the sake of my people. The Calirians are proud and strong, and they will not accept a peace unless it comes with a bond. And now I am bound to you." Ethan studied her for a moment, realizing that there was more to this situation than just politics. Zyra, the powerful and dignified princess, was now just as trapped in this arrangement as he was. The realization made him feel a little less alone in this strange new world. "So, what happens now?" Ethan asked. "We've done our part, right? The wedding's over. The peace treaty is signed. Is there more to this than just staying married?" Zyra sighed, looking out over the dimly lit hall. "You have no idea, Captain Ford. I cannot simply end this union. There is more at stake than you realize. The Calirian Empire does not let go of its commitments so easily. And as for you, you are now tied to me, whether you like it or not." Ethan frowned. "You don't have to worry. I'm not going anywhere." But as he said it, he couldn't help but wonder. Did he really mean that? He had planned to return to Earth once the war ended. But now that he was married to Zyra, there was no clear path ahead. This union wasn't just about peace anymore. It was about his future, her future, and the future of two worlds that were still so different. Zyra gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, though her voice was distant once more. "Because now, you belong to the Calirians as much as I do." The silence stretched between them. Neither of them knew what the future would bring, but one thing was clear: This marriage, though born of duty, was about to become something neither of them could escape. The days continued to blend together, each one seemingly like the last, but beneath the surface, the tension was growing. Ethan could feel it in the air, the weight of uncertainty that loomed over Calirian space like a storm waiting to break. Despite the calm of the palace, something didn't feel right. Zira had been more distant than ever, consumed with her responsibilities. Ethan couldn't help but notice the way she moved through the halls, her gaze always focused ahead, never allowing herself to rest. He had hoped that their recent conversation in the gardens would help ease some of the pressure, but it seemed that Zira was determined to carry the weight of the galaxy alone. One evening, as they walked through the grand corridor, the sound of distant voices echoed through the stone walls. They were approaching a council meeting, and Zira seemed lost in her thoughts, her mind somewhere far away. "You don't have to do this all on your own," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence. His words felt almost out of place in the stillness between them, but he knew it was something that needed to be said. Zira glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't have a choice, Ethan," she replied, her voice tinged with a bitterness he hadn't heard before. "I have a duty to my people, and no one else can bear it for me." Ethan didn't argue. He had learned by now that Zira was as stubborn as she was strong, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was beginning to burn herself out. He didn't know what would happen if she couldn't keep up this pace. He could only hope she would allow herself the space to breathe before everything crumbled beneath her. As the council meeting began, Ethan took a seat in the back of the grand hall. The room was filled with a mix of alien species, all of them watching Zira closely. She was their queen, their leader, and they expected nothing less than perfection from her. Ethan could see the pressure in her eyes as she addressed the group, her every word measured and deliberate. "The peace between our worlds remains fragile," Zira said, her voice steady but cold. "We must continue to work together to ensure that it holds. I trust that each of you will do your part." Her words were strong, but Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she spoke. It was a subtle detail, one that most people would have missed, but not him. He had learned to read her, and right now, she was on the edge. He wished there was something he could do to make it easier for her. The meeting went on for hours, and as it ended, the group began to disperse. Zira remained standing at the front, speaking with various advisors, but Ethan could see the exhaustion in her posture. She was still trying to hold it all together, but the cracks were starting to show. After the council members had filed out, Ethan approached her. "Zira," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you need to rest." "I'm fine," she replied quickly, her eyes not meeting his. "I have things to take care of." "No, you don't," Ethan said, stepping closer. "You've been working nonstop. This isn't just about duty, it's about your well-being." Zira finally met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I can't afford to rest. If I do, everything will fall apart. I can't let that happen." Ethan could see the fear in her eyes now, the fear that she had been hiding behind her royal mask. She wasn't invincible, no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise. "You're human too, Zira," he said gently. "You don't have to carry it all alone." For a moment, there was silence between them. Zira seemed to consider his words, but she quickly turned away. "I have to go," she said curtly, before walking off toward the nearest exit. Ethan watched her go, his heart heavy with concern. He understood why she felt this way. She had been raised for this, trained to be the ruler, the protector. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of her crown was suffocating her. It was only a matter of time before she broke under the pressure. Later that evening, as Ethan wandered the palace alone, he overheard something that made his blood run cold. In a dark corner of the corridor, two guards were speaking in hushed tones. "I heard rumors about the alliance," one of them said, his voice low. "Some are saying it's not enough, that the Calirians need more than just peace." Ethan's ears perked up. He knew that the alliance was fragile, but he hadn't realized just how fragile. The political tension was rising again, and it seemed that there were factions within Calirian society that weren't satisfied with the status quo. "The rebels are restless," the second guard replied. "They don't trust the humans. They think we've compromised too much." Ethan's heart sank. If the rebellion was stirring again, it would be disastrous. The fragile peace between their worlds could shatter in an instant. The guards fell silent, and Ethan quickly retreated into the shadows, his mind racing. He needed to warn Zyra, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed to find someone who could help him get the message across without causing panic. As he made his way back to his quarters, Ethan realized that the stakes had just gotten much higher. The peace they had worked so hard to build was in danger, and Zyra was standing at the heart of the storm. Ethan knew one thing for certain: if the conflict broke out again, he wouldn't just be fighting for his own survival. He'd be fighting to protect the woman he had come to care for, no matter the cost. The days had become a blur for Ethan. With each passing hour, the tension between the Calirians and the humans seemed to thicken, like an unseen storm brewing on the horizon. He had tried his best to stay close to Zyra, to offer his support, but she remained distant, her mind forever focused on the political chaos threatening to tear their worlds apart. He had been right. There was something darker at play. The rumors of rebellion had spread like wildfire, and now Ethan could see the cracks in the alliance beginning to show. It wasn't just the rebels within Calirian society that posed a threat. There were whispers among the humans, too. Some factions believed the Calirians were weak, that the peace treaty was an illusion, and they were willing to do anything to destroy it. Zyra was unaware of the full extent of the danger. She was still consumed by her duties, focused only on maintaining her kingdom's fragile grip on power. Ethan wished he could do more, but it wasn't just her strength that was required to survive this storm. It would take every person in the galaxy working together. One evening, as the palace grew quiet, Ethan found himself alone in his quarters, staring out at the Calirian skyline. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the city. The peaceful sight only made the tension in his chest grow tighter. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming, something neither he nor Zyra could prevent on their own. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Ethan stood quickly, surprised by the late visit. He opened it to find one of Zyra's trusted advisors standing in the hallway, a look of urgency on his face. "Ethan," the advisor said, his voice strained. "We need you." "It's Zyra." A knot formed in Ethan's stomach. "What's happened?" he asked, his heart racing. "She's gone to the council meeting," the advisor explained, his tone grave. "But there's been an attack. We don't know who's behind it yet, but we're certain it's linked to the growing unrest." Ethan's mind raced. An attack on Zyra. It could mean only one thing. The rebellion had moved from whispers to action. He didn't hesitate for a second. "I'm coming," he said, grabbing his jacket. He followed the advisor through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing in the silence. When they arrived at the council hall, the scene was chaos. The large room, once a symbol of unity, was now filled with frantic movement. Calirian guards were at every door, their eyes alert and weapons drawn. At the far end of the room, Zyra stood, flanked by her most trusted warriors. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd for any sign of the threat. "Zyra," Ethan called, rushing toward her. She turned to face him, her expression softening for just a moment before the weight of the situation pulled her back into focus. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "A group of rebels infiltrated the meeting," Zyra explained, her voice steady despite the chaos. "They've taken several hostages. They're demanding more power, more control. They don't believe the peace treaty will hold, and they want to use this moment to strike." Ethan's heart sank. The rebellion was real, and it was much more dangerous than he had imagined. The peace that had seemed so secure was now hanging by a thread. "You can't do this alone," Ethan said urgently. "You need help." Zyra's eyes flashed with determination, but there was something else in them. Fear, for the first time since he'd met her. She seemed vulnerable. "I know," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I can't trust anyone fully. Not right now." Ethan stepped forward, his resolve firm. "You can trust me." For a long moment, they stood there, staring at each other. The noise of the chaos around them seemed to fade as their gazes locked. Zira seemed to consider his words, her shoulders tense with the weight of responsibility. "I'll trust you, Ethan," she finally said, her voice steady again. "But you need to stay close. We need to end this before it gets worse." With that, they turned their attention back to the situation at hand. The rebels had taken control of a section of the hall, holding hostages at gunpoint. The Calirian warriors were trying to negotiate, but it was clear that the rebels were not interested in peace. Ethan's mind raced. He knew this wasn't just about Zyra anymore. It was about the future of the galaxy. If the peace collapsed now, it could lead to a full-scale war. And that would mean destruction for everyone involved. Without another word, Zyra stepped forward, addressing the rebels. Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable strength in her tone. "You've made a mistake," she said, her eyes sweeping over the rebels. "I understand your anger, but this is not the way to achieve your goals. You've put everything at risk." The rebel leader stepped forward, his face hidden beneath a mask. "You're weak, Zyra. Your peace treaty is a lie. Your people are starving, and you still choose to play politics. We're going to take control, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." Ethan moved closer to Zyra, his hand resting lightly on the weapon at his side. He could feel the tension in the air, the threat of violence hanging heavy. This was it, the moment where everything would change. "You're wrong," Zyra said firmly, her voice rising. "We've worked too hard to let it all fall apart, and I will not let you destroy everything we've built." In that moment, something shifted. The rebel leader's expression faltered, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. It was a brief crack, but it was enough. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and confident. "If you're truly fighting for change, there's a better way. We can find it, together." For the first time since the rebellion had begun, there was a sliver of hope. The storm wasn't over, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could weather it together. The sun was setting over the Calirian capital, its orange glow spilling across the skyline. Ethan stood at the edge of the palace balcony, his hands resting on the railing, his thoughts drifting back to the chaos of the last few days. It had been a whirlwind, hostages freed, rebels captured, and yet, somehow, the peace between their two worlds remained intact. Zyra had been incredible. Her leadership, her bravery. It had all been tested, but she had come through stronger than ever. He had stood by her side through it all, offering his support, and in the end, they had won. But as much as he wanted to believe the worst was behind them, the future still felt uncertain. Behind him, the sound of footsteps broke his thoughts. He turned to see Zyra approaching, her expression serious but calmer than it had been in days. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was only silence between them, a quiet understanding. "You look deep in thought," Zyra said, her voice soft. But there was an edge to it, an undertone of something more, something they had yet to address. Ethan smiled faintly, his gaze returning to the horizon. "Just thinking about everything we've been through. It's hard to believe how much has changed in such a short time." Zyra nodded, stepping closer to him. "I know, but we've made it through the hardest part, I think. The rebellion is over. The treaty stands. And for now, at least, peace is secure." There was a pause, a moment of relief that both of them savored. But even as they stood there, taking in the calm after the storm, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was still something unresolved between them. They had fought side by side, and in doing so, they had shared more than just a bond of political necessity. They had shared a connection, a bond that had grown stronger with each passing trial. "Zyra," Ethan began, his voice low, "about what happened back at the council hall. When we..." She cut him off gently, her hand resting on his arm. "I know what you're going to say," she said, her gaze locking with his. "I owe you more than words can express. You stood by me when no one else did. You helped me see that the true strength of this alliance doesn't come from the power we hold, but from the trust we place in each other." Ethan's heart fluttered at her words, but there was something more, something he couldn't put into words, a feeling that had been growing between them for days. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew it wasn't something he could ignore any longer. "I've been thinking too," he said quietly. "When all of this is over, when the galaxy settles, when everything is calm again, what happens then?" Zira's eyes softened. She stepped closer, her presence commanding yet gentle. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a deep breath, turning fully to face her. "I mean, I don't want to leave. I don't want to just walk away from this, from you. You've shown me a side of this galaxy that I never thought I'd see. I want to be here, with you. I've been by your side through the worst, and I don't want that to end." Her expression softened even more, a mixture of relief and something deeper, something unspoken. She took his hand, her fingers brushing against his in a gesture that felt like more than just an answer. "You don't have to leave, Ethan," she said, her voice steady, yet full of emotion. This is just the beginning. We have the chance to build something new, something that's never been done before. Together." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They stood there, side by side, taking in the weight of the words that hung between them. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, it felt like anything was possible. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "So, what now? What do we do?" Zira smiled, a smile that held both warmth and strength. "We continue. We rebuild what's broken, we keep the peace, and we make sure that no one forgets the power of unity. And most importantly, we make sure we never lose sight of the trust we found in each other." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. He had come to Calirian not knowing what to expect, unsure of his place in a world that was so different from his own. But now, with Zira beside him, he felt certain of one thing. He was exactly where he needed to be. "I'm with you," he said, his voice firm. "I know," she replied softly, her hand tightening around his. "And together, we'll make sure that this peace lasts." The night sky stretched out before them, filled with stars and promise. The future was still unknown, but for the first time, it didn't matter. They had each other, and together, they could face whatever came their way. As they stood there, the soft breeze of the evening surrounding them, they both knew that this was just the beginning of something greater than either had imagined. The conflict was over. The treaty had held, and in the quiet aftermath of battle, they had found something even more precious: trust, hope, and the possibility of a future that would be shaped by their hands together.